The frost clung stubbornly to the edges of the grass that morning, a pale shimmer under the thin light of dawn. The world was still in that fragile hour before the village fully woke. No footsteps yet on the gravel road, no clatter of milk cans, only the sigh of wind slipping between bare branches. In the distance, the faint crunch of small boots broke the quiet, unsteady and deliberate, as if the walker was carrying an invisible weight. Little Sophie came into view first, her knitted cap pulled low, cheeks pink against the cold, and, behind her, as always, padded the black and white dog with the thick winter coat and the eyes that watched too closely. The villagers had grown used to the sight over the past year, the child heading down that narrow lane toward the low hill, the dog trailing in quiet guardianship. Some mornings he lingered far behind. Others he stayed close enough that his breath curled in the air beside her mittens. No one knew where the pair went, not exactly, but this morning, something was different. Halfway down the lane, the dog surged forward, his paws kicking frost into the air, and moved to block her path. Sophie stopped short. The knitted tassels at the ends of her scarf swayed in the stillness as she looked down at him. His chest rose and fell faster than the cold should have allowed. His gaze fixed not on her but on something beyond, further down the lane. She tried to step around him. He moved with her. Again and again there was no bark, no growl, just that rigid stillness of an animal who has already decided. Sophie's brow furrowed, her mitten tightening around the strap of her little satchel. The silence between them stretched long enough for the wind to pick up, carrying the scent of something faintly metallic. Somewhere far off, a crow called, its voice low and flat against the pale sky. A figure emerged from the bend ahead, or at least the suggestion of one. It moved strangely, not with the rhythm of someone walking to work or to the market. The dog's ears pricked forward, his whole body leaning ever so slightly toward the movement, then back toward the child as if weighing which way the danger lay. Sophie shifted again, and again he blocked her, his nails clicking softly against the frost-hardened dirt. Upstairs curtain in the nearest house twitched, then fell back into place. Someone had seen, but no one came out. In villages like this, people knew when to stay inside, when to watch without being seen. The figure ahead paused. From this distance, it was impossible to make out a face, but the head tilted in a way that sent a strange shiver through the air, like the drop in temperature before rain. The dog let out a low sound, deep in his throat, not quite a growl, not quite a whine, and for the first time, Sophie stepped back instead of forward. The path narrowed there, hemmed in by overgrown hedges, the sort that swallowed sound and shadow whole even in daylight. The bend beyond was hidden from view. The dog's stance lowered, muscles drawn taut, as if preparing for something that might not come but could. The wind shifted again, bringing with it the soft, almost imperceptible rhythm of breathing, not Sophie's, not the dog's. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the movement ahead stopped. The figure was gone. No footstep retreating, no crack of a twig, just the empty lane stretching on, rimmed with frost, as if nothing at all had been there. Sophie looked up at her companion, her lips parting as if to speak, but the words caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. The dog did not turn to her. His gaze stayed fixed on the bend ahead, his body still a wall between her and whatever lay beyond. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the faint rustle of dry leaves trapped in the hedge, shifting in a wind that suddenly felt colder. When Sophie finally reached out and placed her mitten gently on the dog's back, he stayed firm, unmoving, somewhere deep in the quiet. Something had changed. The dog's body remained a wall, every muscle coiled as if bracing against something neither of them could yet see. Sophie's mitten stayed on his back, her small fingers curling slightly into his thick winter coat. The hedge beside them shivered in the wind, the dry leaves scraping against one another in a sound that seemed too deliberate to be just the weather. She tilted her head toward the bend, her breath making soft clouds in the cold. The lane ahead looked the same as it had moments ago. Frost along the edges, a thin smear of light filtering through the branches, but the air felt heavier now, as if the world had inhaled and was holding it in. The dog shifted one paw forward, then stopped. Sophie could feel the tremor of restrained energy beneath her palm. His gaze never wavered from the curve in the path, but his ears swiveled toward the hedge. Something was there. It was faint at first, the soft press of weight against frozen earth, but then a sharper sound came, the brittle snap of a twig giving way. Sophie's chest tightened. She'd never heard him make the sound that followed, a deep, pulsing rumble that seemed to come from somewhere beyond his throat, a warning meant for whoever, or whatever, was listening. From the hedge, a slow movement emerged, not the figure they had seen before, but a flash of dung-colored fur, low to the ground. The animal paused just inside the shadow of the branches, its eyes catching the light like small wet stones. A fox, thin from winter, but there was something unnatural in the way it lingered. Foxes didn't block lanes. They didn't wait. The dog stepped forward now, placing himself squarely between Sophie and the hedge, his posture no longer uncertain but fully protective. The fox's gaze darted from him to Sophie and back again, its ears flattened, not in fear but in a strange, tense acknowledgement. Then it slipped back into the undergrowth without a sound. The lane was empty once more. Sophie shifted her weight, as if she might try to pass, but the dog turned his head toward her briefly, eyes dark and steady. It was not a look she had seen before. It wasn't a plea. It was closer to a command. From somewhere beyond the bend came a new sound, not animal this time. Metal, faint but unmistakable. A slow rhythmic clink, followed by the drag of something across the frost-hardened ground. Sophie's grip on her satchel strap tightened until her knuckles were pale. The dog's breathing changed. Faster now, the air puffing visibly from his nostrils. He took another step forward, only to halt again, as if caught between the urge to confront and the need to hold the line. Sophie found herself holding her breath without realizing it. Then the wind turned, and with it came a smell, sharp, acrid, and out of place in the morning air. It reminded her of the time her father had burned metal in the shed, a hot, biting scent that clung to her hair for days. The clinking sound stopped. Silence pressed in on them, broken only by the faint creak of branches overhead. Sophie felt the weight of it in her chest, an invisible hand urging her to step back toward the safety of home. She didn't move. The dog lowered himself slightly, paws spreading against the earth for balance. His tail was still, a dark line against the pale frost. He was waiting for something, or bracing for it. From the far side of the bend came a single, slow footstep. The dog's body was still a wall, tense and immovable beneath Sophie's small mitten. His breath rose in short, steady clouds, each one fading into the cold air as if time itself had slowed. The lane ahead was empty, yet his eyes never wavered from the bend where the figure had vanished. The frost underfoot seemed louder than it should have been, crackling faintly as Sophie shifted her weight. Somewhere beyond the hedges a branch snapped, not sharply, more like something pressing slowly through it. The dog's ears twitched, his head lowering fractionally, shoulders braced. Sophie's mittened fingers curled into the thick fur along his back, the way a child will hold onto something solid without thinking why. The wind came again, harder this time, bringing with it a smell that didn't belong to morning, not the clean frost, not the faint sweetness of wood smoke from the houses behind them. This was darker, bitter, carrying the suggestion of something old and rusted. The dog's nostrils flared, his paw shifted forward an inch, then stopped. From somewhere deep inside the hedge came a sound, not a voice exactly, but a breath, low and measured. Sophie's head tilted, her knitted cap slipping slightly over one eyebrow, eyes straining into the narrow space where hedge met earth. The dog moved to block her sightline, his flank pressing gently but insistently against her legs behind them. The village was waking. A door creaked open, a faint clatter of buckets on stone, but those noises seemed far away, muffled under the weight of the silence in front of them. The dog glanced back at her once, not to seek permission, not even to reassure, but as if to confirm that she was still there. Then his gaze snapped forward again. The figure reappeared, this time closer, too close. Still no face, just the dark outline against the pale frost. The shoulders slightly hunched, the left side lagging as though carrying an unseen burden. Sophie's breath caught. Her mitten rose half an inch as if to wave, but the dog leaned hard, into her knees, forcing her back a step. The figure stopped. A slow turn of the head, deliberate, almost curious, and then the faintest shift of weight, as though deciding whether to come closer or retreat. The pause stretched, long enough for the wind to die and leave only the faint drip of thawing frost from a roof somewhere behind them. Then, without sound, the figure stepped into the hedge and was gone. No rustle, no broken twig, just absence. Sophie's lips moved as if to speak, but the words never left her. The dog waited another long beat before easing his weight off her legs. Instead of heading toward the bend, he turned, nudging her back the way they had come. Sophie hesitated, glancing over her shoulder once, twice, the frost crunching quietly under her boots as she followed. The lane seemed longer now, the edges of the village suddenly unfamiliar in their angles and shadows. She glanced at the houses, wondering if anyone had seen, but the curtains were still drawn tight. The dog kept his head low, scanning the road ahead, as though every shadow could shift into something else. They reached the wooden gate at the end of the lane. Sophie paused, her hand on the latch, and looked down at him. His gaze was fixed beyond her shoulder, toward the road they'd just walked, as if expecting the figure to follow. The muscles along his back rippled once, a tension not yet released. From far off came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, but from the wrong direction. Not from the bend where the figure had been, but from somewhere behind the houses, moving toward the lane's other end. The dog's head lifted, ears angling sharply toward the sound. Sophie turned to the frostlight catching in her wide eyes. Neither moved. The footsteps stopped. The dog's body remained a barrier, a living wall between Sophie and the empty curve of the lane. His breath left in small, controlled bursts, the faint plume dissolving quickly in the cold air. Sophie's mitten stayed on his back, but she didn't press, didn't try to move him now. Somewhere inside her, a part she didn't have words for understood this was not about disobedience. This was something else entirely. The frost beneath her boots gave a soft, reluctant crack as she shifted her weight. The sound seemed too loud in the stillness. Even the wind felt different now, its edge sharper, carrying with it the faint tang of earth turned over somewhere nearby. The hedges ahead didn't stir. Nothing moved. And yet the dog's focus never wavered. A muffled thump broke the quiet, not far, heavy, deliberate, as if something had been set down, or dropped, just beyond that blind bend. The dog's head lifted higher, ears tilting toward the sound. Sophie's heart began to thud, not in fear exactly, but in the way it does, when the air itself seems to be holding a secret. From the upper window of the nearest house, the curtain twitched again. This time it didn't fall back so quickly. A pale outline lingered, half hidden in shadow. Whoever it was didn't call out, didn't wave, just stood there, still. The dog stepped forward, one paw placed with a caution that felt almost human. Sophie stayed rooted where she was, the pull to follow competing with something heavier, the weight of knowing she shouldn't. His head turned slightly toward her, not to check but to measure her readiness. Then, unexpectedly, he sat. Just sat there, the way he always did when they reached a certain point in the path on warmer mornings. But now there was no easing of his posture, no calm. He sat like a guard who knew the gates were under watch. Down the lane, the air shifted again. Not with sound this time, but with movement. You could almost miss a shadow stretching too far across the frost. For the low angle of the sun it was gone in an instant, but Sophie caught it. The dog did too. His tail gave one slow, deliberate sweep along the ground, a gesture that was neither friendly nor fearful. Then came the faintest sound, a voice or something like it, not calling a name, not speaking words Sophie could make out. It was low, almost swallowed by the hedge, but it carried an odd cadence, the way someone might speak when they're coaxing an animal closer. Sophie's fingers tightened around her satchel strap. She thought of the mornings before this one, of how the dog always seemed to appear just as she was setting out, as though he had been waiting for her. She thought of how he slowed near this very stretch of lane, how sometimes he nudged her toward the opposite side without explanation. The questions she'd never asked now pressed at her all at once, but the cold air seemed to lock them in her throat. The dog rose again, this time stepping back toward her. His eyes, so fixed moments ago on whatever lay ahead, shifted to meet hers. Something passed between them in that glance. Not fear, not urgency. Something closer to insistence, as if he knew she needed to choose now. Somewhere beyond the bend, a branch snapped. Short, sharp, the sound of something moving without care to hide it anymore. Then came the faint patter of displaced frost, as if a step had been taken, and then another. The curtain in the window above vanished from view. Sophie took one small step back. The dog matched her step for step, until they were both standing at the place where the lane widened slightly toward the safety of the open road. The wind shifted again, blowing toward them now, and in it was the unmistakable scent of something warm and out of place in the cold, a smell that prickled the edge of memory. Though Sophie couldn't say why, the dog stopped moving. His gaze returned to the bend, but this time his ears flattened slightly, as if he knew what was coming into view before it appeared. Sophie's pulse climbed, her mittened hand slipped from his back. Something was about to break the stillness. The frost at the edge of the bend fractured under a slow, deliberate step. Out from behind the hedge emerged a man, older, his coat hanging loose on narrow shoulders. His eyes were small against the pale, weathered skin, but sharp, too sharp. In one hand, half hidden in his pocket, something metallic caught the faint light before disappearing again. The dog's posture shifted, not into attack, but into something heavier, a stance of refusal. He did not growl. He simply planted himself square in the path, head lowered, gaze locked. The man stopped a few paces away, and for a moment no one moved. The wind pressed at their backs. It was the smell that reached Sophie then, the same one the wind had carried earlier, coppery, and beneath it, a faint rot, the kind that clings to places where things are kept too long. She didn't understand all of it, but she understood enough to step back again, one careful pace. The man's eyes flicked to her, then to the dog. He made a sound, a low, coaxing tone, the same rhythm she'd heard before, like someone calling an animal in from the dark. The dog didn't move. His muscles were drawn tight, every breath measured, minutes, or perhaps only seconds, stretched thin. Then, as if something unspoken passed between man and dog, the man shifted his weight, hesitated, and stepped back toward the hedge. Another step, then another, until the curve swallowed him whole again. Only when the sound of his retreat had vanished into the hush of the lane did the dog turn to Sophie. His eyes searched her face briefly. Then he nudged her toward the road. They walked in silence. By the time they reached the village square, the morning light had softened, brushing the frost with silver instead of white. A few villagers stood at doorways watching, but no one spoke. The upstairs window curtain that had twitched before now hung still, as if it had never moved at all. The dog walked her all the way to the gate of her home before stopping. He didn't follow her in, didn't look for food or a pat on the head. He simply stood there as if marking the distance between where she was safe and where the lane began. Sophie turned back once before closing the gate, but he was already walking away, his shape receding into the narrow streets. In the days that followed, She would learn pieces of what lay behind that morning, whispered warnings from the baker's wife, an old police notice tacked discreetly to the wall behind the grocer's counter, the quiet talk of someone who had returned to the village and was best left unspoken about. But none of those words felt as real as the moment on the frost-white lane when the dog had stood between her and the bend. Winter held on for weeks after, the air crisp, the mornings slow to brighten. Sophie still saw him most days, though now he often lingered at a distance, his head just visible above a hedge or at the far end of a path. She began to understand that his watch was not casual, not habit, it was chosen. One morning, not long after the frost had begun to loosen its grip, she woke to find the lane empty. Days passed. The villagers said nothing, but she noticed the way some of them glanced toward the fields beyond the old orchard. It was there she finally saw him again, lying on a patch of sun-warmed earth, his eyes half closed. He lifted his head when she approached, and for a moment it was as if they were back on that lane, the same unspoken understanding between them. She sat beside him without speaking. They stayed like that until the light began to fade, the shadows stretching long over the grass. When she finally rose to leave, he didn't follow. He simply watched her go, his gaze steady, as if assuring himself that the path behind her was clear. Weeks later, she would walk the lane alone. The frost would be gone, the hedges alive with green. She would pass the bend without stopping, but her eyes would drift to the space where he had once stood, holding the line between her and whatever waited beyond. In the soft soil near the bend, just out of the path's center, a single paw print would remain pressed deep enough to outlast the morning dew.